The sun always seemed to rise a little slower over Pinecrest Valley. It would peek over the grand, dark green mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, before its warm light finally touched the quiet houses below. In this gentle morning light, the world felt peaceful and still. At the very end of a winding, tree-lined lane stood a small, cozy house. It wasn't the biggest or the newest house on the street. Its white paint was a little faded, and the wooden porch steps creaked a friendly greeting to anyone who visited. But this house held more love than any other building in the entire town. This was the home of Alara Vance. Alara was a widow. Her husband, Arthur, had passed away 2 years ago, and since then, her world had become much quieter. She was a kind woman with soft gray hair and eyes that held a lifetime of memories. Some days, a deep sadness would wrap around her heart, making the world feel gray and empty. But every morning, she had a reason to get out of bed, a reason to smile. That reason was her garden. To call it a garden was like calling a magnificent symphony just a song. It was a living, breathing masterpiece of color and life. It was the story of Alara and Arthur's love, written not on paper, but in flowers and trees. Crimson roses, the color of a deep, passionate love, climbed over a wooden archway that Arthur had built with his own hands 40 years ago. Bright yellow sunflowers, always facing the sky, stood tall and proud, just like Arthur's spirit. There were patches of blue forget-me-nots and herbs that smelled like happiness and summer rain. In the center was an old stone bird bath where little sparrows would splash and play, their cheerful songs filling the air. For Alara, this garden was not just plants and dirt. It was her last connection to Arthur. When she watered the roses, she could almost feel his strong, gentle hand over hers. When she sat on the little bench under the oak tree, she could almost hear his laugh mixing with the sound of the leaves rustling in the wind. This garden was their life, their love, their memories. It was her sanctuary. It was the only thing that kept her broken heart from completely falling apart. She would spend hours there, talking to the flowers as if they were old friends. "Good morning, my darlings," she would whisper. "Look how beautifully you've bloomed today." The bees would buzz happily, and the butterflies would dance from flower to flower. In this place, Alara did not feel alone. But peace, like a beautiful summer day, cannot last forever. A change was coming to Pinecrest Valley. A dark cloud was gathering on the horizon, and its name was Cassandra Graves. Cassandra and her husband had recently moved into the biggest, shiniest house in the new part of the neighborhood, up on the ridge. The house was all sharp corners and giant windows that looked down on everyone else. It was perfect and clean, but it had no soul, no history. Cassandra Graves was a woman who loved rules more than she loved people. She believed that everything in life had to be neat, tidy, and under control. She wanted everyone's house to look the same. Perfect lawns, white fences, no surprises. She didn't understand things like beauty, love, or memory. She only understood power and control. Soon after she moved in, she became the president of the Homeowners Association, the HOA. She had big plans to make Pinecrest Valley perfect. She started by looking down from her big house on the hill, examining every single home through her expensive binoculars, searching for anything she considered wrong. And her cold, critical eyes landed on the one thing that was truly unique, truly alive, and truly loved. Alara's garden. Where Alara saw a masterpiece of love, Cassandra saw a messy, wild jungle. Where Alara saw history, Cassandra saw an eyesore. Where Alara saw beauty, Cassandra saw a problem that needed to be fixed. One Tuesday morning, the air was especially sweet with the smell of jasmine. Alara was humming an old song she and Arthur loved, carefully trimming a rose bush, when she saw the mailman coming up the path. "Good morning, Alara," he called out, his voice friendly. But he looked a little uncomfortable. "Got a letter for you. It's from the HOA." He handed her not the usual pile of friendly letters and catalogs, but a single, stark white envelope. It felt heavy and cold in her hands. On the front, her name and address were printed in a harsh, impersonal font. In the top corner, in bold red letters, were the words, Office of the HOA President, Urgent Notice. A small, cold knot of worry tightened in Alara's stomach. She had never received a letter like this before. With slightly trembling fingers, she tore the envelope open. The paper inside was just as crisp and cold. The words were like little bullets. Violation Notice, Code 7.4.3. Dear Resident, it began. It didn't even use her name. It has come to our attention that your property is in serious violation of community standards. Your current landscaping is unapproved, overgrown, and deemed an eyesore. You are hereby ordered to remove all non-compliant vegetation, including all rose bushes, sunflowers, and irregular flower beds, and replace it with approved grass turf within 14 days. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart started to beat very fast. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Failure to comply, the letter continued, will result in automatic fines of $100 per day until the violation is corrected. The beautiful, sun-drenched garden now felt like a crime scene. The vibrant colors of the flowers seemed to mock Alara, each petal a reminder of the violation notice that lay like a poisonous weed on the pristine grass. The letter's harsh, typewritten words echoed in her mind, a cruel, heartless chant. Eyesore. Violation. Remove. Destroy. For 2 days, Alara moved through her house like a ghost. The cheerful chirping of the birds outside her window sounded like warnings. The gentle breeze that rustled the leaves of the oak tree felt like a sigh of despair. She couldn't bring herself to go into the garden. It was too painful. To look at it was to see it already gone, ripped out, and replaced by a cold, empty, perfect lawn of grass. A lawn with no memory, no love, no soul. She felt a deep, aching confusion. How could something so beautiful be so wrong? How could a place that brought her so much comfort bring someone else so much anger? She had always been a good neighbor, a quiet presence. She had never caused any trouble. Why was this happening? The fear was paralyzing. $100 a day. She lived on a fixed income, a small pension, and the Social Security she received after Arthur's passing. She could never afford that. They would fine her until she had no choice, until they could take her house away. The home she had shared with Arthur. The last place that held his spirit. She felt small, weak, old. The world had become a confusing and cruel place, and she didn't know how to navigate it without her husband by her side. The sadness was a heavy blanket, smothering her will to fight. On the 3rd day, the doorbell rang. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. Alara's heart leaped in her throat. She knew, with a cold certainty, who it was. Slowly, she walked to the door, her legs feeling like lead. She opened it to find Cassandra Graves standing on her porch. She was dressed in a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit, her posture rigid. She held a leather-bound clipboard tightly against her chest, like a shield. Her smile was thin and didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. Ms. Vance, Cassandra said, her voice as crisp and impersonal as the letter. I assume you've received our correspondence. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Alara could only nod, her voice trapped in her throat. Cassandra's eyes didn't stay on Alara. They scanned past her into the living room, taking in the comfortable, slightly worn furniture, the family photos on the mantelpiece, silently judging and finding everything lacking. I'm here to do a follow-up inspection, Cassandra announced, not waiting for an invitation. She took a step forward, forcing Alara to move aside. The 14-day deadline is ticking. I don't see any progress. She walked through the living room and straight to the back window that looked out onto the garden. She stared at it, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. As you can see from a notice, this collection of plants is completely non-compliant, she said, gesturing with her clipboard as if swatting away the beauty. The rules are very clear. Approved grass turf. Neat. Tidy. Uniform. This, she waved her hand dismissively at the explosion of life and color. This is chaos. It looks wild. It brings down the property value for everyone. Alara found her voice, though it was little more than a whisper. But it's my garden. My husband and I. Cassandra cut her off, turning to face her with that patient, condescending smile. Ms. Vance, I understand sentimentality. I really do. But sentimentality doesn't pay the bills. It certainly doesn't maintain property values. This is a community. We all have to abide by the same standards. We can't have special exceptions for everyone's personal feelings. The word were like slaps. Sentimentality. Chaos. She was reducing 40 years of love to a messy inconvenience. Now, Cassandra continued, her tone becoming brisk and businesslike. I suggest you hire a landscaping crew immediately. The HOA has an approved list of vendors on our website. They'll clear all this out and install a beautiful, compliant lawn for you. It will be so much easier to maintain. She handed Alara a business card from her clipboard. It was for a company called Perfect Lawns Incorporated. Alara stared at the card, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall in front of this woman. This felt like being asked to hire someone to bulldoze her own heart. Cassandra gave one last, sweeping look of disgust at the garden, nodded curtly, and left. Her high heels clicked a sharp, final tattoo on the flagstone path, a sound of absolute dismissal. The door closed, and Alara was alone. The silence in the house was deafening. The encounter had left her feeling hollowed out, violated. She had been judged and found worthless in her own home. She stumbled back to the kitchen and sank into a chair, the business card lying on the table like a threat. She felt utterly defeated. Maybe Cassandra was right. Maybe she was just a silly old woman clinging to the past. Maybe it was easier to just give up, to let them tear it all out. What was the point of fighting? She was all alone. A deep, overwhelming wave of grief washed over her, not just for Arthur, but for herself, for her garden, for the world that had become so cold. She put her head in her hands and cried, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. She cried for a long time, until there were no tears left. She felt empty, weak, and terribly sad. As she sat there in the quiet kitchen, her eyes drifted across the room. They landed on a dusty photo frame on a high shelf. It was a picture she hadn't looked at in years. Wiping her eyes, she stood up and walked over to it. She blew the dust off the glass. In the photograph, a much younger Alara stood on the steps of a grand courthouse. She was wearing a sharp, dark suit, her hair styled perfectly. She wasn't smiling for the camera. She was looking directly into the lens with an expression of fierce intelligence and unwavering determination. In her arms, she held a thick stack of files. Next to her, beaming with pride, stood Arthur. It was the day she had won a landmark case against a giant chemical company that was dumping waste into a local river. She had been a force of nature, a brilliant, feared environmental lawyer. She had spent her career fighting for what was right, protecting the land, the water, and the people who others would rather ignore. Arthur had always called her his lioness. He had been her biggest supporter, her rock, her cheerleader. Looking at that photo, something shifted inside her. The memory wasn't just a picture from the past. It was a spark. Cassandra's words echoed in her mind. Sentimentality doesn't pay the bills. But this wasn't about sentimentality. This was about justice. A new feeling began to push aside the sadness and fear. It was a low, simmering anger. How dare this woman come into her home and dismiss her life's work? How dare she threaten the very thing that kept Alara connected to the man who had always believed in her strength? The weak, sad old widow was fading away. In her place, someone else was waking up. She looked from the photo of the fierce lawyer to the HOA's violation letter on the table. Then she looked out the window at her garden, at Arthur's roses. Her eyes narrowed. Her chin lifted. Cassandra Graves had made a huge mistake. She had seen a fragile old woman to be bullied. She hadn't bothered to look deeper. She hadn't seen the lioness. A calm determination settled over Alara. The tears were gone. The confusion was gone. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't just going to fight this violation. She was going to fight the entire system. She was going to use the very skills she had spent a lifetime honing. She wasn't just going to save her garden for herself. She was going to do it for Arthur. And she was going to do it for every other person in Pinecrest Valley who Cassandra Graves might try to push around. She walked to the door that led to Arthur's old study. a room she had kept closed since his passing. She turned the knob and pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light cutting through the blinds. The room smelled of old books and memories. In the corner stood a large, heavy filing cabinet. Alara Vance, the retired environmental lawyer, was going back to work. The dust in the study was thick and still, a blanket over a life paused. Sunlight, cutting through the slats of the blinds, illuminated millions of tiny particles dancing in the air. To anyone else, it would have felt like a tomb. But to Alara, stepping into Arthur's old study for the first time in 2 years, it felt like coming home. It felt like waking up. The violation letter from Cassandra Graves lay on the large oak desk, a stark white insult against the warm, dark wood. Alara placed it there deliberately. It was her reminder, her motivation. With a resolve that felt both foreign and familiar, she rolled up the sleeves of her old cardigan. Her first mission was simple: know your enemy. She needed the HOA's governing documents, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC and RS. Every homeowner had to sign them. She had a copy somewhere, buried in a file from when they bought the house a lifetime ago. After 20 minutes of searching through dusty boxes labeled important papers in Arthur's neat handwriting, she found it. A thick booklet with a bland, blue cover, Pinecrest Valley HOA, Rules and Regulations. She carried it to the desk, sat in Arthur's worn leather chair, and began to read. The language was dry, full of legal jargon designed to confuse and intimidate. But Alara wasn't intimidated. This was her old playground. She read about approved paint colors, fence heights, and mailbox styles. She read about the rules for trash cans and holiday decorations. And finally, she found it. Section 7.4.3, Landscaping and Vegetation Control. Asterisk, all front and side yards must consist of a minimum 70% approved grass turf. All other vegetation, including but not limited to vegetable gardens, non-approved flower beds, and shrubbery, must be pre-approved by the HOA Architecture Committee. Asterisk. It went on and on. The rules were absurdly specific and restrictive. But as she read, her lawyer's mind, rusty but still sharp, began to poke at the edges. The rule was about aesthetics, about control. But what about the methods used to achieve this sterile perfection? The booklet mentioned HOA-approved maintenance for common areas, but was vague on the details. A question, small but persistent, began to form in her mind. What are they using to keep those common areas so perfectly green and weed-free? It was a hunch, a thread, and Alara knew from experience that if you pulled on the right thread, whole tapestries could unravel. The next day, instead of tending to her garden, she took a walk. She pushed her old-wheeled grocery cart, pretending to be on her way to the store, but her path took her deliberately through the common areas maintained by the HOA. The manicured lawns near the entrance, the perfect flower beds by the community sign, the playground at the center of the neighborhood. Everything was immaculate. Not a single dandelion dared to show its face. The grass was a uniform, almost unnatural shade of green. And then she smelled it, a sharp, chemical odor that hung in the air. It was a smell she knew all too well from her past cases. Herbicide, pesticide. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She stopped near the playground, where a young mother was pushing her little boy on a swing. The grass right up to the edge of the rubber matting was that same intense green. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Alara said, offering a friendly smile. The young woman smiled back. "It is. We try to get out before it gets too hot." "The grounds look so lovely," Alara said, carefully. "So green. The HOA must have a wonderful landscaping company." The mother's smile faded slightly. "Oh, they're very thorough. They were here just yesterday spraying. I had to bring Liam inside. That stuff smells awful, doesn't it? Gives me a headache. Spraying. Right by the playground." Alara's blood ran cold. The thread was pulling taut. "Do you know what they use?" Alara asked, keeping her voice light, conversational. "No idea," the woman shrugged. "Some strong chemical, I guess. They put up little yellow flags afterward, but they're gone in a few hours." That was all Alara needed to hear. She said her goodbyes and continued her walk, her mind racing. The little yellow flags were a warning sign for chemicals. This wasn't just about looks anymore. This was about safety. That afternoon, she became a detective. She went online to the county clerk's website, a place she hadn't visited in years. She searched for the HOA's business filings, their contracts. She found the name of their landscaping company, Greengate Lawn Care. A quick search revealed they promoted aggressive weed control and maximum results. Then, she dug deeper. She accessed public environmental databases, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed she'd forgotten she possessed. She cross-referenced the chemicals commonly used for such aggressive lawn care. What she found made her stomach turn. The most likely culprit was a powerful herbicide called trilexoidout. It was known for its effectiveness and its toxicity. Studies linked it to skin irritation, respiratory problems, and with long-term exposure, more serious health issues. It was particularly dangerous for children and pets, and it was known to leach into the soil, potentially contaminating groundwater. The creek, Arthur's Creek, the one that ran through the common land and then along the back of several properties, including her own, the one where kids skipped stones and dogs played, was the HOA's obsession with a perfect, weed-free lawn poisoning their children, poisoning their water? This was no longer about her garden. This was so much bigger. Cassandra wasn't just a bully. She was a menace. She was risking the health of the entire community for the sake of curb appeal. Alara printed everything. She highlighted the most damning evidence. The case was building, but it was still just paper. She needed to connect it to the ground, to her home. That evening, under the cover of twilight, she did something she never thought she'd do again. She became a field investigator. With a small trowel and a set of clean glass jars from her kitchen, she slipped out her back gate and into the common area near the creek. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. Using the trowel, she took samples of the soil from the edge of the perfectly manicured lawn. She took a water sample from the creek, just downstream from where the HOA crews worked. She labeled each jar carefully with the time, date, and location. The next day, she packaged them up and sent them to an independent lab she had used decades ago, requesting a rush analysis for trilexa and other common toxic chemicals. Then she waited. The days were tense. Every time she saw a Greengate truck, her jaw tightened. Every time she saw a child playing on the bright green grass, her heart ached. The lab results came back via email a week later. She opened the report, her hands trembling. Positive. Levels of trilexoidout in the soil sample exceeded recommended safety limits by 300%. Traces of the chemical were present in the creek water. The proof was in her hands. Cold, hard, terrifying facts. She could have gone straight to Cassandra. She could have waved the paper in her face. But she knew that wouldn't work. Cassandra would deny, deflect, and find a way to punish her even more. This needed a different approach. This needed people. She made copies of the lab report. She highlighted the key findings in simple, clear yellow. Then, she took a deep breath and walked next door to her neighbor, Ben, a quiet man who lived with his energetic golden retriever. She showed him the paper. Ben, she said, her voice calm but serious. I need you to look at this. Do you let Max play in the common area by the creek? Ben read the report. His face, usually cheerful, grew pale. He was just rolling around there yesterday. This is for real, Alara. It's for real, she said softly. She went to the young mother from the playground, whose son was named Liam. She showed her the report. The woman's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, he's been having a rash. I thought it was just allergies. One by one, carefully and quietly, Alara spoke to her neighbors. She wasn't the sad widow complaining about her flowers anymore. She was a concerned citizen presenting evidence. She showed them the truth. She showed them that the HOA's perfection had a dangerous, poisonous cost. The reaction was a quiet earthquake. Worried whispers replaced casual hellos. People started looking at the flawlessly green lawns with suspicion and fear, not admiration. The support that had once felt so out of reach began to flow toward her. It wasn't about her roses anymore. It was about their children, their pets, their health. They had chosen a side, and they had chosen Alara. A nervous energy crackled through Pinecrest Valley. It was in the hushed conversations over fences, The worried glances exchanged while collecting mail, the way people quickly pulled their children and pets inside when the familiar Greengate lawn care trucks rolled through. The beautiful, sunny days now felt tense, the perfectly manicured lawns hiding a terrible secret. Alara's quiet investigation had lit a fuse. Cassandra Graves could feel it. She saw the way people now looked at her, not with respect or fear, but with suspicion. Her authority, which had always been absolute, was being questioned, and she knew exactly where the rebellion had started, at the end of that winding lane in that messy garden. She couldn't find Alara into silence fast enough. The whispers were becoming a roar. She needed to reassert her control, publicly and decisively. She needed to make an example of Alara Vance. The notice went out via email and was stapled to every community bulletin board. Emergency HOA meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. Community Hall. Mandatory attendance. One violation will be addressed. Everyone knew which violation. Everyone knew who. The community hall was packed by 6:45. Folding chairs were filled with nervous homeowners. The air was thick with anxiety and the smell of cheap coffee. People spoke in low murmurs, their eyes darting toward the door. Alara arrived alone. She wore a simple, dark blue dress. In her hands, she held a single, slim folder. She looked calm, but inside, her heart was a drum against her ribs. She found a seat near the back, but all eyes followed her. At exactly 7 p.m., the side door opened and Cassandra Graves entered. She marched to the front of the room, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor like a judge entering a courtroom. She placed her leather binder on the podium and adjusted the microphone with a sharp squeal of feedback. "Good evening," she began, her voice cold and amplified. "I've called this meeting tonight to address a critical issue, an issue of blatant disregard for our community's rules, an issue of one resident who believes she is above the law that binds us all together." She didn't even say Alara's name. She didn't have to. "For weeks," Cassandra continued, her voice dripping with false patience, "we have tried to work with this resident. We have issued warnings. We have given extensions. We have even offered helpful solutions. But our kindness, our patience, has been met with nothing but defiance and a campaign of misinformation." She paused, letting the word misinformation hang in the air like a poison gas. "This individual has not only refused to correct her violation, a wild, unsightly garden that is a blight on our property values, but she has now begun to spread malicious lies about this board, lies about our maintenance practices, fear-mongering lies designed to turn you all against each other." Her voice rose, becoming sharper, more accusatory. She pointed a finger, sweeping it across the audience. "She wants you to be afraid. She wants to create chaos because she doesn't want to be held accountable. She is a selfish individual who cares more about her weeds than she does about this community, about your children's safety, about your investment." She was painting a picture, and in it, Alara was a villain. A crazy, selfish old woman causing trouble for everyone. Alara sat perfectly still, listening. She felt the heat of everyone's gaze. She heard the lies, the twisting of the truth. But she didn't react. She just waited. She let Cassandra talk herself out. "Therefore," Cassandra declared, slamming her hand on the podium for effect, "I'm calling for a vote tonight. A vote to place an immediate lien on the property at 1123, Winding Lane for failure to comply. Let's see how she fights when her house is on the line." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. "Alien?" That was the nuclear option. That meant they could eventually force her out of her home. Cassandra looked out, a triumphant gleam in her eye. All in favor? The room was dead silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The bullying tactic had stunned them into silence. It was then that a chair scraped softly against the floor. Every head turned. Alara Vance was standing up. She didn't march to the front. She simply walked, slowly and calmly, down the center aisle. The crowd parted for her. She didn't look at Cassandra. She looked at her neighbors, at the young parents, at the elderly couples, at the people she had lived beside for 40 years. She reached the front and turned to face them all. Cassandra stared at her, furious, but was too shocked to stop her. Alara didn't touch the microphone. She didn't need to. Her voice, though not loud, was clear and carried to every corner of the silent room. Cassandra speaks of rules, Alara began, her voice steady. She speaks of property values, but she forgets the most important rules. The rules of common decency. The rules of humanity. She opened the folder in her hands. She calls me a liar. She says I spread misinformation. Alara held up the first page, the lab report from the independent analysis. This is a report from a state-certified laboratory. It shows that the soil in our common areas, the areas where our children play, where our pets run, contains levels of trilexoidal herbicide that are 300% above safety limits. A gasp rippled through the room. She held up another page. This is the safety sheet for that chemical. It lists possible health effects: skin rashes, respiratory problems, and with long-term exposure, more serious issues. It is known to leach into groundwater. She looked directly at the young mother, Liam's mom. It is particularly dangerous for children. She could see the understanding dawning on their faces, the fear turning into anger. She told you I care only about my weeds, Alara said, her voice softening, becoming personal. She looked out at her garden, visible through the hall's window, bathed in the evening light. My garden is not weeds. It is my husband. It is my memory. It is 40 years of love and laughter and life. Every rose bush, every sunflower has a story. To ask me to destroy is to ask me to erase him all over again. Tears were flowing freely down the faces of many in the audience now. But this, she said, holding up the lab report again, her voice strengthening with conviction, this is not about my garden. This is not about me. This is about you. This is about your families. This is about the truth. Cassandra Graves is so obsessed with a perfect-looking lawn that she is willing to poison our land and our children to get it. She is the one who is selfish. She is the one who is a danger to this community. She finished. She didn't shout. She simply stated the facts from her heart. The silence in the room was profound. Then, from the middle of the crowd, a chair scraped back. Ben, her neighbor, stood up. I stand with Alara, he said, his voice strong and clear. Another sound. The young mother, holding her son, stood up. So do I. Then, an elderly man, Mr. Gable, who had known Arthur, struggled to his feet. Arthur Vance was a good man. That garden is a monument to him, and I'll be damned if I let you destroy it. One by one, then in groups, then almost as one entire body, the entire community rose to their feet. They stood in silent, powerful solidarity. They were no longer afraid. They were united. Cassandra Graves stood behind the podium, utterly alone. Her face was a mask of stunned, furious disbelief. Her perfect meeting, her show of power, had completely and utterly backfired. She had not crushed the rebellion. She had united it against her. She had lost. The silence in the community hall was louder than any shout. It was a powerful, ringing quiet, filled with the weight of dozens of people standing together. They weren't looking at Cassandra Graves anymore. Their backs were to her. Every face was turned toward Alara, their expressions a mixture of awe, gratitude, and fierce determination. Cassandra stood frozen behind the podium, her knuckles white as she gripped the edges. The look on her face was one of pure, undiluted shock. This had never happened before. Her threats, her rules, her power, it had always worked. She had always been able to divide and conquer, to make people feel small and alone. But now they weren't alone. They were together, and they were looking at her not with fear, but with something far more dangerous, disappointment and anger. She opened her mouth to say something, to try and regain control, but no sound came out. The microphone squealed with feedback, a harsh, embarrassing sound that made her flinch. It was the final straw. With a strangled, furious noise, she snatched her leather binder, turned on her heel, and almost ran from the room through the side door, leaving the stunned HOA treasurer staring after her. The moment the door slammed shut, the hall erupted. It wasn't with cheering, but with a buzz of urgent conversation. People surrounded Alara, not to confront her, but to thank her, to ask questions. to offer help. "Alara, what do we do now? Is it really safe to let the kids play outside?" "Those chemicals, my dog has been sick." Alara, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through her, held up her hands. "The first thing we do," she said, her voice finding a new, natural authority, "is form a new committee. A real one. Right now." And they did. They didn't leave the hall. They pulled out chairs and formed a circle. Ben, the neighbor with the golden retriever, volunteered to be the temporary chair. The young mother, Sarah, took notes on her phone. They voted unanimously to immediately suspend Cassandra Graves and the entire old board pending a full review. They voted to halt all chemical spraying by Greengate Lawn Care until a full environmental audit could be completed. The change didn't happen overnight, but it happened quickly. Within a week, a proper election was held. The new board was made up of people like Ben and Sarah, practical, caring, and deeply concerned about the community's real well-being, not just its appearance. Their first official act was to tear up the old, restrictive landscaping rules. In their place, they created new, sensible guidelines that encouraged native plants, drought-resistant gardens, and sustainable practices. They promoted a new slogan, Pinecrest Valley, a natural community. They hired a new, eco-friendly landscaping company. The sharp chemical smell that had hung over the common areas began to fade, replaced by the honest scent of clean air and healthy soil. And Alara's garden? It was not just saved, it was celebrated. The new board passed a special resolution, declaring the garden at 1123 Winding Lane a neighborhood heritage site. A small, tasteful plaque was placed near the gate. It read, "In loving memory of Arthur Vance," a testament to love that grows. Word spread through the town about the widow who had stood up to the powerful HOA with nothing but the truth and a folder of evidence. People from other neighborhoods would sometimes take a slow drive down her lane just to catch a glimpse of the famous garden. It became a symbol of something much larger than itself, a symbol of courage, of love, and of a community finding its heart again. But the most important change was in Alara herself. The deep, aching sadness that had been her constant companion for 2 years didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, strength, a quiet, steady peace. She had honored Arthur not just by tending his memory, but by fighting for it. She had used the strength he always saw in her. She was no longer just Arthur's widow. She was Alara Vance again. One bright afternoon, she was in the garden, her hands buried in the rich soil, planting new lavender bushes. The sun was warm on her back, and the bees were buzzing a happy tune. She heard the creak of her gate and looked up. It was Sarah, with her little boy Liam holding her hand. The rash on his arms was nearly gone. "Hi, Alara," Sarah said softly. "We were just walking by. We don't want to bother you." "You could never be a bother, dear," Alara said, smiling warmly. "Would you like to help me plant this one?" Liam nodded shyly. Alara showed him how to gently pat the soil around the tiny plant. His small, careful hands working beside her wrinkled ones was a perfect picture. As Sarah and Liam left, waving goodbye, Alara stood and wiped her hands on her apron. She looked around at her masterpiece. The roses were blooming more vibrantly than ever. The sunflowers stood like joyful soldiers. The memory of Arthur was in every petal, every leaf, every whispering branch. It was no longer a place of sadness. It was a place of life, of continuity, of new beginnings. She knew there would be challenges ahead. Cassandra had moved away shortly after the meeting, her perfect empire in ruins, but the world would always have its bullies. It didn't matter. Alara had found her fight again, and she knew she would never lose it. She sat on the old wooden bench, Arthur's bench, and looked out over the valley she called home. The creek sparkled in the sunlight, clean and safe. In the distance, she could hear the happy shouts of children playing. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree, and for a moment, it felt like a whisper of familiar, loving touch. Alara closed her eyes, smiled, and listened to her garden grow.